Have you ever walked into a place that's meant to be welcoming, like a community center or even a place of worship, and
Mhm.
something about it just felt, I don't know, off, like not quite right?
I think we've all had those experiences, right?
Yeah. And today we're talking about a situation where that feeling of not quite right can be particularly intense. And that's for folks on the autism spectrum in religious settings. It's a topic that's often overlooked, but incredibly important.
Absolutely. And, it's fascinating because when we think about religion or spirituality, we often think about, finding comfort, acceptance, a sense of belonging.
Right,
But
exactly.
for neurodivergent individuals, the reality of navigating those spaces can be much more complicated.
And so much of that comes down to the sensory and social dynamics that are often considered, I don't know, just part and parcel of religious life.
Exactly. Like the music, the crowds, the
The
rituals.
incense.
Yes, the incense. All of those things that are meant to enhance the experience for some can be incredibly overwhelming for others.
And we're not talking about like mild discomfort here.
Right. Or someone with autism who might have sensory sensitivities, these experiences can be deeply unsettling, even physically painful. Absolutely. And it's not just about the sensory aspect either.
Right.
It's the social dimension, too.
Yeah, because there are often these unspoken rules, these expectations for how to act, what to say, when to speak.
Precisely. The subtle cues, the rituals, it's a lot to process.
And for someone who processes social information differently, it can feel like you're constantly missing those cues,
Mm.
saying the wrong thing.
Or not understanding the social script. Absolutely.
And I imagine that's where some of those feelings of not belonging or even feeling ostracized can really start to take root.
Exactly. And, it's heartbreaking because it's this space that's supposed to be about acceptance, about love, about, finding a sense of community.
And instead, it becomes a source of anxiety, of stress, even trauma.
Absolutely.
So we're going to unpack all of that today and more as we explore this really important intersection of autism and religious trauma.
It's a conversation we need to be having.
And I think what's so important to remember is that this isn't just about a few awkward moments, right?
Right. This isn't just about, oh, I felt a little out of place.
Yeah,
This is about how those repeated experiences, those feelings of not belonging, can have a real impact on someone's sense of self.
absolutely. And their relationship with their faith, too.
Exactly, because if you're constantly being told, either directly or indirectly, that you're not experiencing your faith in the right way, it's only natural to start internalizing those messages.
And I imagine for someone who might already be struggling with self-esteem issues or who might be prone to anxiety or depression, those messages can be particularly damaging.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things where it can become this vicious cycle, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because the more you feel like you're not fitting in, the more anxious you might become, the more likely you are to actually miss those social cues.
Oh, totally. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Exactly. And it can be incredibly isolating.
And it makes me wonder, thinking about those feelings of isolation, how much of this is about the environment itself versus maybe just, I don't know, personality differences or something,
That's a really great question. And, it's probably a bit of both.
right?
But I think what we're really talking about here is the importance of creating spaces that are truly inclusive and welcoming to everyone.
And that goes beyond just, having a ramp for a wheelchair.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing that people experience the world in different ways and that those differences should be celebrated, not just tolerated.
Exactly. Because when we create environments that are designed for a very narrow range of sensory experiences and social styles, it's inevitable that some people are going to feel excluded.
And, it's interesting because when you look at the research on autistic individuals and their experiences in religious settings, one of the things that comes up again and again is this idea of finding solace and connection in nature.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks to the power of finding spaces where you can truly be yourself, where you don't feel the need to mask or suppress who you are.
And that might look different for everyone,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
For some people, it might be a traditional religious setting,
For others, it might be a walk in the woods.
online community.
Exactly. An online community where you feel seen and understood.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so important to remember is that there's no one right way to find that sense of belonging, that sense of spiritual fulfillment.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I find so inspiring about the autistic community is the incredible resilience that they demonstrate in the face of these challenges.
Absolutely.
Because they're constantly having to adapt to navigate a world that's not really designed for them.
Right.
And yet they find ways to not only survive, but to thrive.
Exactly. So how do we bottle that? How do we take those lessons of resilience, of adaptation, of finding connection in unexpected places, and apply them to create a world that's more inclusive for everyone?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right?
You know, it's funny because we've been talking about this very specific intersection of autism and religious trauma,
Right.
but it feels like we're having a much bigger conversation here
Absolutely.
about, just the way that society is structured and how that impacts anyone who doesn't quite fit the mold.
Exactly. And, it's interesting because when you think about it, a lot of the things that we consider to be just normal social expectations,
Yeah.
like making eye contact or, being able to follow a conversation that's happening really quickly,
Hmm.
those things can be really challenging for people on the autism spectrum.
Absolutely. And, it makes you wonder how many people are out there, not just folks on the spectrum, but anyone who's ever felt like they had to kind of twist themselves into a pretzel to fit in,
Oh, absolutely.
and how exhausting that must be.
It is incredibly exhausting. And, it can really take a toll on your mental health,
Oh, for sure.
your physical health as well.
So, I mean, how do we shift from this model of like survival of the fittest, socially speaking,
Right.
to a model where everybody can actually thrive?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that, diversity is a good thing
Okay.
and that different doesn't mean deficient.
I like that. Yeah.
And so often, we have this tendency to try to like fix people or to,
Okay.
help them to be more like us.
Right.
When in reality, we should be celebrating those differences and recognizing that they bring a lot of value to the table.
And you know what it reminds me of is something you said earlier about how, sometimes it's not about the person, it's about the environment.
Exactly.
And so I'm wondering, are there things that we can do to kind of like tweak the environment to make it more inclusive?
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many things we can do, and some of them are really simple.
Okay, like what?
Like, for example, just being mindful of the language that we use,
Okay.
using clear and concise language, avoiding jargon, being aware of sensory sensitivities, like, if you're in a bright room, maybe dim the lights a little bit.
Right.
Or if there's a lot of noise going on, maybe offer to move to a quieter space.
Okay.
It's really just about being thoughtful and considerate of the needs of others.
And I imagine that takes practice.
It does take practice, but it's like anything else. The more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Well, on that note, I think we're just about out of time, but this has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
And for everyone listening, we hope that this has given you some food for thought,
Absolutely.
some things to kind of ponder in your own lives.
Yes.
And maybe even inspire you to make some small changes in your own corners of the world.
I hope so.
Because even small changes can make a big difference.
They really can.
So until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other,
And stay curious.
and we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.